Hi there, everyone. It's Hugo Anderson here. I am super excited to be doing a live podcast recording today with Omoju Miller, where we'll be talking about open source, generative AI, and LLM ecosystems. What we need to see there, and how to escape the generative AI walled gardens that we're seeing emerge. We'll get started in a couple of minutes, and please introduce yourself in the chat. In the meantime, let us know where you're watching from. And what your interest in these things are, whether you're a hobbyist or a working professional in machine learning and AI, and so on. And we'll get started in a minute. All right, Omoju, let's get started.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hey, wonderful to see you. Good afternoon to you. It's morning for me. You're in the Bay Area?
Yes, it's good afternoon on a wet Friday.
Absolutely. And it's gonna rain here today as well. It's a very humid day, but it's cooled down slightly. We actually had it was like 40 degrees Celsius the other day, so like over 100, which you gotta lucky I got AC recently.
No.
So I'd just love to welcome everyone to this live stream. I'm going to introduce you in the conversation. You can correct me on anything I get wrong. Omoju and I have been speaking for years, and I'm such a fan of her work. I refer to Omoju as a machine learning guru. Those are my words, not hers. But she's also founder and CEO of Fimio, where she's building 21st century dev tooling. In the past, Omoju was technical advisor to the CEO at GitHub, spent time co-leading nonprofit investment in computer science education for Google, and served as a volunteer advisor to the Obama administration's White House Presidential Innovation Fellows. And we're here to talk today about open tools, open data, provenance, and the ability to build fully reproducible, transparent machine learning workflows, particularly in a world where we're seeing tooling become more and more commoditized and being put behind closed vendor APIs that are absolutely opaque in many dimensions, right? So feel free to ask questions in the chat. Please introduce yourself. The obligatory, if you enjoy this, please do subscribe and like wherever that stuff happens, and share with your friends if you think they'd find interesting. But that's all by the by. Omoju, last time we recorded a podcast in the before times, 2018 or 2017. Yeah, something.
The before times.
Exactly. You were at GitHub then, and we had a wonderful conversation about machine learning at GitHub, but you've been so busy since then. So I wonder if you could just set the scene by telling us a bit about your trajectory, maybe a bit about your history at GitHub as well, because I think that's quite relevant to this conversation and what you've been up to since.
All right. So recently I went back and looked at one of the keynotes from the developer conferences at GitHub in 2018, where we were introducing semantic search, which is something that our friend that we have in common, Hamal Hussein, was working on at GitHub. And semantic search was basically searching for functions using natural language. And there was this small little experiment that they did, and we're all very excited about it. Oh, you could search for like, I want to flatten a Python list. And you would write that, and then out would come a Python function. And that was like revolutionary. Fast forward, there's this collaboration between GitHub, OpenAI, Microsoft, and bada boom, bada bing, we have GitHub Copilot, which is semantic search taken to its nth element. And Copilot is revolutionary. Yeah. That thing really, 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 really works. So Copilot launched. I was working with the CEO then. We launched it. And then after that, I left. And I left to go do what I thought was going to be very, very exciting work in Web3. And the reason why I wanted to work in Web3 is the reason why I worked at GitHub. I really believe in open source, and I believe in the power of open source to transform the world. In my mind, Web3 was the next evolution of open source. Like the thing that we needed was some kind of corporate governance structure over our projects so we can make better decisions and we can hand over like who's the maintainer, all of this stuff that just happens in open source projects. I went and did that. I founded Fimio, and I wanted to build security for Web3 dev tooling. Well, the market fell out from under us and we couldn't do that anymore. So we pivoted. And what we pivoted into is basically the same thing, still open, still working in the same space of how do we build very good developer tooling for reproducible builds in ML? And the reason why I'm picking on that is even as we're doing the work for Web3, what I really, really wanted to do was I had this idea that the web is a web, but it's almost like a city. It's like a metaphor of a city. And you have like these different locations and different paths. And we should do something like more sophisticated path routing. So let's take those algorithms and start putting it on Ethereum and see if interesting things would occur. In playing around with those network algorithms at scale, it was so painful. It was so painful just to even get the machine up, to get everything to work. And I started thinking to myself, there's gotta be an easier way for doing this. Everybody shouldn't have to go through this over and over and over again. And my brain just got fixated on that idea to the point now that that's basically what I do every day. It's like, let's just solve this thing once and for all and make sure that this builds are reproducible and easy. So people don't have to fight with infrastructure. They can just go ahead and do fun stuff.
Amazing. And I actually really love your analogy or metaphor or image of the web as a city. I actually think it's very relevant. I want to take a slight detour here, which I think will set the stage for some of our conversation. It reminded me of Neil Stephenson's novel Snow Crash, which I don't know if you've read, but it has a virtual reality space in it called the metaverse. This is actually really, really whack what happens in this novel, because the metaverse is a space which was intended to be an open space for people to exchange information and tools and these types of things. But in the metaverse, in Snow Crash, corporate entities have literally taken over a huge amount of the space. So it's a dystopic version of it where they've essentially put up walled gardens in the metaverse, which is one of the reasons I was surprised when Mark Zuckerberg called it the metaverse. I was like, have you read this, bro? Like what?
Like this is not what we're supposed to be
doing. Exactly. But in a sense, and it's an extreme analogy that I'm making now in this sense, but as we know, what we're seeing now is this model of walled gardens being applied to data tooling ecosystems with closed vendor APIs. So this actually dovetails very nicely into where I wanted to start. I want to start with what may seem like a silly question, and it is in some ways. The question is, so we're here to chat about the need for open tools. So I'm wondering what that term even means. And I want to kind of thread the needle in a certain way, because it may seem obvious what open tools mean. Like we have the PyData ecosystem, right? Obvious that these are open tools in a number of dimensions. But I'm interested in, even if we look at what people call open source LLMs these days, such as the Llama family from Facebook, from Meta, people are now referring to them more as open weight, right? Because they're not quite open source. We don't have the code. We have the weights. We don't have the training data. So are these even open tools? And I suppose what I'm referring to now is that there are many dimensions to what open tools mean. So in your mind, what do we mean when we talk about open tools, and what do you think is important here?
Number one, I would even push back even further and say, even in our little beloved PyData ecosystem, we are not as open as we would like to be. Amazing. Because the first part of openness to me is accessibility.
Yep.
So is it accessible? Like, can I actually get my hands on it? And is it easy to just use? Number one. Can I read the code? To be open source must literally mean open source, the source of the thing, the language. Where is it? Somewhere. That should be available to me. And then the processes should be like fully in the open. How are decisions made? Usually many open source projects, you can figure out the decision-making mechanism. You can join their little meetings if you want to. You can read all the issues. You can go backwards and figure it out. So there's also like some kind of openish form of governance where you can come up with, you can propose things and it can get shut down. And so I think all of those accessible, the source code itself has to be open, and the governance mechanisms and decision-making has to be somewhat open and easily permissionless. Like you can just participate if you wanted to, as much as you want or as little as you want.
Amazing. And it's interesting in terms of accessibility. I've primarily worked in the Python and R ecosystems. People who've heard me talk before have probably heard me talk about this ad nauseum. But my background's in biology. I've worked with a lot of biologists in my time, and I always taught them how to use R because it abstracts over the terminal, and you can do package management from within the IDE, which if I'm trying to work with a scientist who isn't necessarily as computationally minded, and shouldn't necessarily be, right? Like they're wonderful experimentalists and scientists. But if I'm trying to show them how to use Python, and we're dealing with package management issues at the start in the terminal, then we spin up a Jupyter notebook and wait, the kernel that I had in the terminal isn't the kernel that's accessible from the Jupyter notebook. And then I'm like, oh, wait, so now do I have to I check out Stack Overflow. It tells me to install something called IPyKernel. By this point, I've already lost the scientists. Trying to teach them about version control, and then I'm teaching them notebooks, and they're like, how do I even version notebooks, right? Whereas, of course, RStudio notebooks are actually all Markdown. So it's actually relatively more versionable, and thus these tools become more accessible. So I think that really speaks to your point that PyData is accessible in a lot of ways, but not as accessible as perhaps we'd like to be, as utilizable by everyone as possible.
Yes, we have a deep romance with friction. That's one thing I've come to realize as developers. And maybe it's the environment of the terminal, and maybe we've watched too much Matrix, and you feel very sexy and amazing, and you're fighting through the challenges, and then you finally make it work. And there is an euphoric feeling that does come over you when you've labored over something, and now you finally got it. You've learned how to actually use Vim. You can finally escape from the Vim environment. You're not trapped into the state. But if you're a good designer of products, the first thing you have to be is empathetic. So you have to put yourself in the role of the customer. You have to empathize. Nobody should have to fight through anything. Our tools should just easily work. So we still have a lot of work to do, and we need to completely drive down the barriers, because our field is no longer just for technically minded people. Lots of scientists use these tools. This thing is now mainstream, and they are not going to fight through learning version control and figuring out all the different versions and the kernels and the this and the that. You lose them. It's just they just feel like, oh, this is too painful. I don't want to do it. And that goes to the conversation we're having today. We have to say one of the benefits and the truly amazing thing that ChatGPT, OpenAI did was creating the interface of a chatbot. It is a chatbot. It is not, you don't even need sophisticated tooling. You need a browser, you need some kind of thing, and you can just speak in natural language. You don't have to install anything. You could literally just speak. And if you don't want to even type, you could speak and something will happen. So it's so accessible. Everybody that can speak in language can use it. So the interface really, really matters. And that they've nailed. And we should take that lesson from them.
Absolutely. And that's what happened at the end of 2022, right? I mean, the model itself wasn't necessarily new, but I mean, the tale, apocryphal or not, is that OpenAI was like, hey, let's put a wrapper around it to see whether people can use it and it'll take off. And so, in fact, and this is something I hope to get to in this conversation, it was really a UX choice they made, right? A design choice, and not necessarily a deeply technical choice. And to your point, I know a lot of people who don't even know this. If you have the app on your phone, maybe you have to subscribe. I'd pay whatever monthly, $20 a month or whatever. But to your point, you can talk to it. And I go for walks with ChatGPT and get it to use DALL-E 3 while walking, to generate images while going for a walk. And it actually changed. It used to, what it used to do was I would talk and then it would respond immediately. Now it shows you the text if you want, and you can edit it if you'd like, and that type of stuff. So as this speaks to the point that the product is constantly updating itself, right? And this is part of the concern that you and I, may have different versions. I mean, I think the extreme version of the statement is there is no product, right? And what I mean by that is there is no static product.
Yeah.
So reproducibility is tough there. But something I'm interested in is there's almost a paradox in that ChatGPT, as you've said, has democratized access to this type of stuff, but it's also an example of the most closed interface we have out there.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, this isn't a coincidence as well, right? I mean, the people, corporations, companies that have the capital to build these types of products, of course, want to protect their trade secrets, right? So is there some sort of societal paradox we have that those who are able to create these type of things also have vested interest to keep them closed?
That is a limited perspective. I'm not saying that they're nefarious or anything, but I think it's a failure of imagination. Because what we need is inventing new models of making money. And there's always this issue of a moat. We must always have a moat. You know, what is my moat? And this winner take all, I've dug this deep moat, and therefore I can just stay there and be happy and nobody can come for me. I think it's a 20th century mindset, honestly, because if you provide value to people, they will pay. Your moat is provide value and be empathetic. If you can achieve those two things consistently, you have a business, and you have to go figure out what is the value that I'm making here. It may not necessarily just be hoarding this data and putting it all behind iron bars. But that's just like a very limited mindset of this is how we make money. I think we need to push further. I really liked what Google was trying to do with Gemini. I mean, they've had a rough week because they are the ones pushing the boundaries of actually we want to make this thing as open source as possible.
Yep.
And so at least, they are trying to do that. Meta is also trying to like really, really open some of this stuff. And it's so unfortunate that they fell into a ditch. Yep. And it was just like, oh, everybody lost their minds. Like, oh, the thing is woke. But at least they're even trying. So we can start moving in that direction. And then we can come up with what is the real business use case here? What is the business model for this thing? Because these things are too expensive to run. We have to run them. How do we make them keep running without burning all of the money? Because these are very powerful machines. And they need to you need to figure out some kind of business plan. Even OpenAI, we're all paying at $20. And the reason why we keep on paying, they're not the only show in town. There are other competitors. But if it provides value, you pay for it. And the thing is, I don't think there's going to be a winner take all. You may subscribe to 5 or 6 for different reasons. I use OpenAI's ChatGPT, GPT-4. I also use Perplexity AI. I use Perplexity mostly for research. Like if I want something with citations, I use that. And it's not, I'm fine with everything.
Absolutely. And to that point, I think Perplexity, if you haven't checked out Perplexity AI, people definitely do. Big fan of Claude as well. Perplexity is very interesting because in the world of large language models, we've kind of forgotten about search, right?
Yes.
As one of the fundamental tools of our civilization now. And so there's going to be a continuum between search and large language models. And I think Perplexity is the first data point of showing that there's something very valuable here. It isn't only search. It isn't just a chatbot interface, but it's somewhere in the middle. And I'm very excited about all the products we'll see that come out there. I am also interested in this idea of value creation. And I don't know much about what I'm about to say. So feel free to push back as much as possible. But I do think with certain open source tooling, we've seen, I think what people who are more economically minded than me would call value creation, but not value capture, right? And there's this whole conversation around we need to create value, but then there's a whole conversation around, and this is like all the defensible modes, flywheels, however you want to frame it. But then you've got the idea of capturing value. And I think the PyData, there are a lot of companies that work to support PyData, to monetize it, to employ open source contributors and maintainers, wonderful efforts. But I don't know whether we've found a viable way to quote unquote capture all the value that's created in these open source ecosystems.
I don't think we have, because we still have the funding the commons problem.
Yep.
And that is a perpetual open wound to this thing, because we have to fund the commons. There are people doing all this work. Those people need to get paid. And we still have not found the best solutions yet. Sometimes it's grants, but we need the marriage of capitalism is not in itself evil. We need to leverage capitalism to actually achieve our ends. If you don't do value creation and value capture, you're going to perpetually be in an environment where you can't keep your commons alive.
Absolutely.
And so you can't do one without the other. You have to do both.
Yeah. I think a lot of people we see in positions of power now aren't even real capitalists. I'd love it if they were real capitalists. I think real capitalists want to pay people for their work. I mean, there's a lot of sucking up a lot of different things and resources. But so you mentioned that these things are expensive. So in talking about open tools now, especially with the type of compute power we need to train these models and then inference, fine-tune, RAG, these types of things, there are significant costs. So how do we think about open? We already have an accessibility issue with compute with respect to financial costs. At least prior to this, like, think about Pandas, right? Anyone could, like, cost or not, there were costs, but it wasn't financial costs to download Pandas and to do import Pandas as PD, read a CSV, whatever it is. How do we think about open compute when there are significant financial costs involved as well?
I think this is where Web3 actually becomes an asset, Web3 infrastructure. We are not going to have like $1 billion lying around to spin up some data center. That's probably not going to happen for most of us.
Yep.
However, on the other hand, this might sound so silly and stupid. What is a GPU? I think a GPU is like 1,000 CPUs or something.
Something like that.
And so if you need 100 GPUs, that means you need X amount of CPUs. Those CPUs are lying around everywhere in our houses. I just my drawer and I saw a phone that I forgot I even owned. I was like, what is this? I have so many appliances in my house that I don't use. All of them have cores in them. We need some kind of decentralized compute where you can just put all of your stuff on the web, and then we could have a giant mesh and use it to do open computing. So it has to be decentralized. We have to come up with some incentive mechanism to allow this to occur. Maybe in the future, I may pursue such an idea, but right now I'm not doing it. But that is where I have thought about this thing all the way through. The slice I'm taking right now is reproducibility. You need to do that. Then when we do all of that, you need to have this computing solution solved. And I think what we should do is some kind of decentralized mesh.
Amazing.
And I think it's also greener too. Just like it's literally just better for the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. So how can we think about achieving that when there are, pretty huge players with significant economic interests involved as well?
Don't worry about them. Let them do what they're going to do. So they're going to solve the enterprise issue. The huge players that are playing right now are giving us the opportunity to actually achieve something very, very interesting and sophisticated, because they have the incentive, the capital incentive to drive this through, so we can actually see how powerful these tools are. So they've gotten us started. We know there's a there, so we've de-risked it. There's no risk anymore. At this point, LLMs are no longer like risk-laden. Where yes, there's some hallucination, there's this and that, but we've de-risked it. Now it is up to us to come up with more interesting hardware solutions or all these different meshes to actually then run this at scale in an open way. So there's still a challenge for us. Let them do what they're going to do, because when we achieve what we want to achieve, it's actually also still better for them because it reduces the cost for enterprise as well.
Absolutely. So we've mentioned this a couple of times now, but one thing we really wanted to talk about is fully reproducible machine learning workflows, which I think is, there's so much that goes into that. So I'm wondering if you could tease apart the moving parts of what it means to be a fully reproducible machine learning workflow.
Basically, the first thing I'm trying to do is this. If I see something in some Jupyter notebook, or somebody drops some hot paper, the paper of the week that is spicy on Twitter, this model can do X, Y, Z. I would like to just be able to go take that model and test it out to see if it can actually do X, Y, Z against my data set. Just that.
Yep.
Not trying to put anything in production. Can I just make that happen? And can I understand that process? Right now, it is not trivial to do that. The first thing is, where is the code? So even if they put their weights there and sometimes it's actually very hard for you to go find the source code itself.
Sure.
Okay, now we found the source code. Sometimes the source code is not packaged in a way that is easily deployable. So it's all right. So I gotta go create my requirements.txt. What versions of, we're talking about Python here. So what versions of all the dependencies do I actually need? Okay, find all the versions of the dependencies that I need. And then what machines can actually run this thing? Provisioning that machine and making sure that that machine is up to spec and it works with that software. And then what data set exactly did they actually use to test against? And then what was the output that was generated? Can I compare that to the one that I've done? So having all of that workflow done in a way that is trivial is what we're talking about, that we can reproduce exactly the same thing. Not that when I go back to that GitHub repo and pull the code and try to build it, it has broken because the dependency has shifted from underneath me, or now the machine that I'm using has updated its driver or something that's broken over there, or I can't even get my hand on the original data set, or the eval has shifted, all this different stuff.
Do you think tools like Colab go part of the way in solving this?
They do. Colab is very, very good because at least Colab, if it's hosted, obviously, by Kaggle and Google, you don't even have to worry about servers or anything like that. You can just like click, pick this, pick that. And then at least you can easily test something first. So it gives you like a proof of concept. The way it fails is now I want to go beyond a demo or a test. I want to put this in. I actually want to build a product with this. I want to productionize this thing. I want to push this in production. Colab falls flat because it's not designed for that. It's more of a didactic tool of teaching and showing versus something that it can easily be built. So then we have to turn that notebook into some other thing and then build it. There's a big difference between writing software and shipping market-ready software.
Tell me about it.
Most of us are very good at writing software, being able to like prove this little thing, and we put it together. But actually shipping software is something that most of us from the academic community have very little experience with, let alone shipping it at scale. Yep.
Agreed. If you solve that, take my money as well. Give me your bank account.
Well, that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're doing. And that's why I'm stopping just right there and being very tunnel focused and leaving the decentralized compute to other people.
Great. I mean, you can't solve everything at once, right?
You can't. No, you can't. And there are like new things that are coming up. There's a package manager, UV, that is based on, it's kind of weird. UV, I like UV. I started using it. It's written in Rust, but for Python. Almost makes me a bit upset that we have to like climb out of Python to make Python better. But at least it's fast, so that can handle some of your package management. But package management itself is actually non-trivial. And I don't think most people even use package managers. The average person writing code just writes code. If you go to Berkeley and talk to some of these PhD students and some of the grad students, many of them write code. They don't even write tests. They write tests or write tests. That is the clear example right there that these people are not building software.
Yep.
They are writing code to solve a very important problem. It's very, very different from software, product.
And I do think we don't necessarily want everyone who writes code to be software engineers, right? But I think the basic practices like tests, unit tests, versioning, refactoring,
integration test.
Yeah, these types of things. There's some low-hanging fruit that people can learn, and it can make their lives significantly easier as well. Very cool.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. But one thing, though, is the one thing I want us to really focus on and not gloss over is that with machine learning itself, it is the scientific workflow, like the scientific process coming out of a lab.
Mm.
That's how we kind of write that kind of code. A lot of it is about experiments, reproducing the experiments, seeing if this one is better than that one. So the process has to be methodical and repeatable. Because what we are doing, even though it's code, is still science. It's an applied science. So that scientific method should be the way we actually work with using these tools. And that is a paradigm mind shift.
And to your point, I think a lot of machine learning in practice is decidedly unscientific. One of my early episodes of this podcast actually had our dear mutual friend Hamel on, and he talked about when he joined Airbnb and sat down to look at like one of their machine learning pipelines with one of their machine learning engineers, and he sat down next to this person and they like showed him an Excel spreadsheet, and I made like with data in it that was color coded in a variety of ways, and they were like sending spreadsheets back and forth and that type of stuff. And Hamel was just like, this is Airbnb. Like what is going on here? And that type of approach, I think we're learning how to slowly make scientific, but machine learning has always, I mean, with experiment tracking and these types of things now, we're getting more ideas around how to make it robust, reproducible, and scientific. But there has always, I mean, we all used to like sit down and run machine learning workflows and then like write on my desk or my arm like what the accuracy or F1 was, right?
It's like, write it down, and then you put all your papers. Okay, what was that one? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So my question, and now we have LLMs, which sometimes fit like the same skill set applies in terms of like having to work with data validation, looking at results, experimental mindset, these types of things. But it's also almost everything we're doing with LLMs is experimental and exploration, and there's virtually no machine learning to it in a lot of ways. There's not a lot of science to machine learning, and there's not a lot of machine learning to how we work with LLMs currently. So
yeah, but it's a weird one where there isn't what we think of machine learning. We're not doing like gradients and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But in a way, we kind of also are doing a different kind of ML. So people used to sneak out prompt engineering. Like, what do you mean? What do you mean there's prompt engineering? That is not engineering. Actually, it is learning how to ask a query in the right way to get the response, the retrieval you need is itself an art. And that should be, so now there's this whole thing of prompt versioning. Like, it shouldn't just be willy-nilly. You should be able to like figure out what's going on and be able to use these tools in a way that won't scare you within a corporate structure or within an enterprise, especially if the thing is going to be doing customer support. You should be able to know it's not going to say some crazy thing to your customer and now you're liable for what it said. So it's still, we're moving so fast, but we have to move in a very systematic fashion where you have to record everything and you can roll back and roll forward and do all this kind of tooling.
And to your, I love the example of customer support. Several things come to mind there. I mean, a lot of people who've worked in the space of conversational AI prior to LLMs have always said, hey, you probably shouldn't be serving chatbot responses to customers live, right? You should have a human in the loop constantly. And I think that's incredibly important. And the idea of customer support, someone in customer support being aided by an LLM that can help them answer people's questions and make them, I was going to say a 10x customer support. That's a horrible thing. But you know what I'm 100x. You know what I'm saying. But I think the other,
for it to be an assistant, not to replace the human, to assist the human.
Exactly. And I wonder just how this type of reproducibility, I think, plays into that conversation around, I suppose, the application layer and how it actually helps people do their actual jobs.
I think the thing that is most exciting in that sense is RAG. I honestly think like it's such an interesting thing, this idea of this augmented retrieval thing, because you started talking about search. And search, we were also excited about search, Google search, everybody's using search, but ability to do information retrieval on your own data is far more compelling and powerful. So being able to like bootstrap this thing with your own data and then ask questions. And because it's your own data, your validation sets, your evaluation sets, you should be able to know what it is.
Mm.
If it's pulling all the data from my company, there are questions that it should have an answer to. Who is the CEO of this company? It's not an opinion. It is a fact, like those kinds of things. So I think it makes those kinds of things slightly more reproducible. So every time you add a new stuff to it, you want to run that thing through to see if it's still the same kinds of things, if it has shifted or not. And that way you should have a little bit, not foolproof, but just a little bit of assurance that at least we've done everything we think we can do, that we know to do before we roll this thing out there.
Wonderful. And so I want to go back to the idea of fully reproducible machine learning workflows. I think you've given some really nice heuristics for how to think about the beginnings of it. I am wondering how it changes when you have LLMs, which I suppose require, as we've discussed, significantly more compute. How do you think, does anything change from classic machine learning when we want how to make fully reproducible ML workflows to fully reproducible generative AI workflows?
Oh, I really don't have an answer for the fully reproducible generative AI workflows, because for that, I mean, I think we could definitely build it, but I'm not even sure, because of how expensive they are to train right now, if the business case is there. Because what ends up happening is, since it costs so much money, in that training session, they put a lot of humans in the loop. They have people literally just watching numbers and writing the numbers down and being in charge of different little parts of it, so that the point of their version control is all the humans in the loop, because they can afford to do that. So I don't know if we can say we want to make those parts fully reproducible. What we can make fully reproducible should be all the fine-tuning that is done on them, because these are foundational models. And then we want to fine-tune them to do something. That process of actually making them something valuable by fine-tuning should be fully reproducible.
I love it. And to your point, I do think, how do I want to frame this? I think the term foundation model is actually really nice. I mean, there's some idea of marketing around it as well, and kayfabe, but I do think the idea, we need to agree on certain things at an infrastructural level, right?
Yeah.
And so if we agree
it's a
on
foundation.
Exactly. And to your point, you don't think about the amount of fossil fuels that are probably need to be burned unless you have a lot of green energy sources. If everyone's trying to train the same model over and over again, it makes absolutely no sense. But to your point, the ideas of RAG and fine tuning are incredibly important with respect to reproducibility. So just as, reproducibility with PyData, for example, doesn't mean me, compiling all the source code again and that type of stuff, right? Reproducibility with respect to generative AI may not mean training these large models time and time again.
I don't think so. I honestly don't think so, because they are foundational models. They are that. And for them to be useful to you, it's based on a domain and it's based on context. Except if what you want to use it for is to just search the whole internet. But if you're trying to deploy this to solve a specific type of problem, you then narrow down the domain very, very aggressively, because you want it to do something, not everything.
Yep.
And at doing something, it's fantastic. It is very, very good. That's when it's, and I think it's unfair for what happens to all these models. I mean, look at me anthropomorphizing it. Models don't care. They're not human. But the way we tear the models apart on Twitter, black Nazis, this and that. Okay, yeah, whatever. Like, that's so general and broad. But I want to see an evaluation on a very specific set of things.
Absolutely. To your point, I'm actually just Googling this. I actually want to be very careful in what I say now with respect to black Nazis. Even saying that term feels
it could be taken out of context.
Yeah, but my understanding is that the Nazi party and government they were called Schwarzkommando, and they've been forgotten by history, but there was a whole branch of the military that was people like taken from Africa, essentially, is my understanding. And I do need to fact check this, but there were units of black Nazis called Schwarzkommando, which have kind of been left behind by history in a lot of ways. And I'm not saying Google is correct in what they did, but the fact that we're even able to have this conversation now and it's been opened up. I mean, the Twitterati will say what they want, particularly, and I love that, you know, people will hit incumbents in a lot of ways and like the underdog. OpenAI isn't such an underdog anymore, but
underdog.
Yeah, right. They like a from rag to riches story, so to speak. But I do think it's opening up more conversations as well now.
I think that issue would have been solved if there was citations.
Yes.
If there were some warrants, some evidence.
Yep.
Like, oh, yes. Oh, and here are some evidence that you can go fact check yourself to see whether you agree or disagree. And I think that's the challenge of when something is truly a walled garden, because there is no provenance, there's no investigation. How did you come up with the solution? We can't ask those questions. We can't really investigate the model the way we'd want it to be investigated. Versus
Absolutely.
If it's a human, sentient, cognitive, a human, you can push back and say, what are the warrants? Give me the evidence to support this explanation. What are you pulling from? And then you could then have a richer conversation. Oh, I see. My knowledge was actually lacking. And there is evidence for this. It's quite rare, but it was historically accurate. Then there's no hubbub.
Yeah. So back to fully reproducible workflows. Can we have fully reproducible workflows with closed vendor-based APIs?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think so, because I think a part of something being truly reproducible is there has to be some kind of openness, because the point of reproducing something is to be able to match it to something else and say it's the same or different. It's like running a science experiment and not being able to judge the results, because what are we comparing to? And we have to have the control and the experiment. You need to have visibility, because if the thing that you're comparing against has changed from within and you don't know, how can you figure out what has happened in this experiment that you ran? So I don't think you actually can.
So then,
because it's more of a trust us.
Yeah. And that, I mean, yeah. And there aren't a lot of reasons to trust a lot of corporations these days as well. I am interested, though, what type of openness do we require? Open weights enough? Do we want open code? I think we definitely want that. Do we want to know what the training data is? There are a lot of quote unquote.
I think you want to know the training data.
Yeah.
And you want to know, but I think for the most part, they say they train on the internet, on everything on the internet. But I think you should actually have an open cache of data that everybody trains on. So if it's the internet and it's literally all of the knowledge of human beings that is on the internet, then maybe there should be an archive that is just everybody can pull from it if they want to or not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'll link in the show notes as well to there was I think it was in the New Yorker piece by Jaron Lanier about what he calls data dignity with respect to data provenance. And I do think the internet was built wonderfully and quickly, and there's no next to no provenance associated with stuff on the internet, right? And so we've kind of dug a hole for ourselves. We've set paradigms in motion, which may be challenging to turn back. We have discussed Web3 briefly. I'm wondering also what we can learn about data provenance with respect to training data and model provenance and these types of things from Web3 as well. Is there anything in there that's relevant?
There is. So the first thing I would like to talk about is like a little side, is actually Git. So when Web3, blockchains, everybody's excited about blockchains. I really think Git is the OG decentralized app, but we don't think of it as that. And the other day, it truly hit me. Like, Git is an amazing piece of software because, and Git, we're talking about is version control. When you have a Git repo of something, you have the history of that repository all the way to Genesis. So provenance is baked in.
Yep.
You don't have to wonder, how did this get here? You can roll it back and figure out every person that ever made a commit.
So
you will always know who wrote this line. You can go to GitHub and do git blame, and you see this person is the last person to touch. And if you wanted to keep rolling it back, you can roll it back to infinity to the very first commit.
So to that point, this is a bit embarrassing, but when I first left academia and joined industry, the first company I worked for, one of the first things I did was push some pretty security interested private credentials to an open GitHub repository in the organization. And I was like, oh no, I was like, shit, I don't know how, and I chatted with internal engineers and they're like, we actually don't know how to roll this back properly so that it's in, like, we can revert the commit or whatever, but it's still, if you dig into the commit history, you're still going to find
there.
it.
It's there. So, it hasn't gone away. It's always going to be there forever.
So we got on the call with a whole bunch of people at GitHub, and they were like, yeah, we need to we might just need to delete the repository and start this all over again. And
what ends up happening is there's a product called token scanning, secret scanning. And what it will do is automatically say, somebody has committed a credential. They will, that credential will stop working. They have relationship with all these third parties and it will just be decommissioned. But you can't get rid of it. It's somewhat immutable. But if you wanted to dig into the bottom, you could erase it, but any forensics beginner person can pull it back out. Which is great, because the history is kept. So there's no issue about provenance. It's clearly there who did what.
It's an archive, it's a library. And actually, I listened to an amazing podcast recently about all the libraries we've lost historically, right? And of course, the Library of Alexandria is a very important one. But I suppose there's also an argument that we should forget some things as well. Maybe it's good to have some archives, but it's important to move forward, to be able to access history, but not dwell on the past, I suppose.
Which is perfectly built into Git.
Yep.
The head reference. That's where we focus on. It tells you where your attention should be. But if you need to, you could go all the way back. So for any piece of code that has ever been written to a repo that uses Git, we can do provenance on.
Yep.
But not the internet. And the internet is not just code. So if only HTML or something had that ability within it to roll back, and then we could it'll be a massive job, but you could come up with the provenance of every single line of code that has been written in a Git repo.
Exactly. And that's why
this has nothing to do with GitHub. I could have my own Git server under my desk.
Of course. And this is why projects like the Wayback Machine are incredibly important to preserve the internet that's lost. And I correct me if I'm wrong, but years ago when we recorded our first podcast, I think so my question was about barriers to entry to Git. And then my mind went to the fact that Git can be incredibly annoying to use. Hard. But you told me, even when you were working at GitHub, you were like, oh, I use a GUI or something along those lines.
Oh, no. Till today, I use the Git desktop. I'm not about to be... First of all, I use the Git desktop. I'm not using terminal because half the time, my keys, I can't be bothered. And I also like seeing things. I want to see the thing I'm about to commit. And it's easier for me to just uncheck this and check that. And I want to write my little pretty messages. I want to see things. I want to see colors. And I don't want to see black and all these different neon colors. I like the GUI. I make way less mistakes by using the desktop app. But I like the fact that if that's for me, that's what I use. Yep. Somebody else uses a CLI. Somebody else uses something built into an IDE. It's accessible to whoever wants to use it. It's come up in different ways that you can easily use it.
Absolutely.
But unfortunately, it's still cumbersome and there's still a learning curve.
Yeah.
So we need something that is even better, where the learning curve is much more lower, but we capture all the goodness that this already has.
Yeah. And you and I think a lot about and work on developer tooling, right? And as I said, I've spent a lot of time working with research scientists, with biologists, and a GitHub or a Git GUI, Git desktop is fantastic for them compared to trying to use the CLI. I actually really love and you mentioned in different interfaces and coding environments and that type of stuff. I love using Git in VS Code, for example. I think that integration it works for my purposes really well. So there are lots of different ways to approach it, which I think once again speaks to open tooling and the ability.
Accessibility.
Exactly. So look, far out, Omoju. It's morning for me. I woke up this morning, went for a walk, got a coffee, had a few, ruminated a bit in good ways as to what we'd talk about. I did not look at the news. I try not to look at the news. I want to look at the news in the morning. I try not to. I try to spend a bit of time with myself before looking at the news, to be honest. Didn't see what happened this morning. Got on the call with you, and you said to me, did you see that Elon Musk is suing OpenAI? So it's March 2nd where I am. It's March 1st where you are, for those listening to the podcast recording in a week or two. But I think it's important to talk about this because we're here trying to focus on the work.
Open tooling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And these conversations, it's very important, I think, for, closed vendors to be put in check and that type of stuff, particularly when, they had a certain mission and then we've got these really odd governance structures. But there's also an element of how, I get up every day and there's something distracting me from the work that's happening in the media. And I said to you, I watched Succession recently, and all this stuff with OpenAI, now with Elon Musk, reminds me of the drop. My heart rate goes up when I read this stuff, right? So how can we focus on the work when the world is pulling us into these types of things, which are important? But what's that?
I call it mess because it's never ending. And so for me, as a founder, my God, the last 12 months, 18 months, we've had the whole Silicon Valley Bank debacle. It's one thing after the other, after the other. It's a constant roller coaster ride. It's like watching Oppenheimer, where you're like, the tension could not build anymore, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. And at some point, you just have to shut off because there's such a thing as digital hygiene.
Yeah,
we are all becoming digitally obese. Just letting all this information go through our brains. And you need to have some kind of discipline and filter. Otherwise, you're not actually able to focus and do good work because you're constantly being distracted.
Absolutely. And I actually, I often quote Nassim Taleb, who of course is controversial in a number of ways. And, he can be pretty full on. But he has a wonderful 3-word sentences in one of his books, which is information is toxic.
At some point it actually is.
Yeah.
Because how is this going to affect me? That's the first thing. Is this going to affect me? No. Is this intellectual titillation? Yes. It's a waste of my time.
Exactly.
Do I work at OpenAI? No. Do I use their tooling? Yes. If the tooling goes away, is there an alternative I could switch to? Yes. Why am I concerned? This is not, I don't have a dog in this fight.
Exactly. And it has to do with the cadence of when you approach things as well. So Taleb gives the example of something like a 401k, right? He's like, if you're checking your 401k, how it's performing daily, you're getting absolute noise. Monthly, mostly noise. Yearly, a bit of signal. And I think a lot of similar things around the news cycle. I mean, we're going to see it later this year in the run up to the election and during the election, right? Where you have reporting happening constantly, where there's no new information. And yet somehow they turn it into
keep up something. Yeah.
Exactly. So once again, it's about setting your own vision in a particular Git head, right? Where's your Git head pointing, right?
Yeah, where's the reference? And it's very important to actually set your boundaries and as well as goals. What do we want to achieve? When do we want to achieve it? How are we measuring whether we're moving towards that achievement? If you want to build tools, what is your milestone? Are you hitting your milestones? Just focus on that and continue talking to your customers, whether they are enterprise customers or not. Anybody that is using something that you created, you owe it to them to make yourself available, to talk to them, get their feedback, and make sure you please them by creating value that leads to delight.
Yep, absolutely. And I love the word delight because and you mentioned friction earlier as well. And when thinking about product design and in particular, one way to think about it is you want your user to get their first moment of delight as soon as possible by reducing as much friction as possible, in as few steps as possible, right?
Time to value. So we should have time to value as a metric, time to delight. Reduce that as a metric.
So something we've spoken about before, which I'm really interested in, UNIX-like philosophies for machine learning, for generative AI, in particular, loosely coupled and composable tools. And I know you think about this a lot with respect to machine learning workflows. So I'm wondering if you could give an example or two with respect to how you think about it.
So I have worked in different companies, different organizations doing ML, One thing I keep coming to in everywhere is utils.py. Everybody has their own version of utils.py. And if you go into most of our utils.py, the things in there are so similar. If you're using some cloud-based environment, how do I upload something to this bucket? How do I download something from this bucket? How do I reach to this database? All those things that just in the course of doing this kind of work, you keep doing over and over and over again. We all have our own versions of how we do these things. So we're all writing the same code individually, multiple times, or maybe now being served the same piece of code by some LLM over and over again. Wouldn't it be amazing if there's already a canonical path? If you want to upload a bucket to AWS, this is the path. This is this function. This function should be alive as an API. You could just call it. We know what functions are. We know what the shape of the thing that it needs to, the input is. We know what the output is. We should all just use one that is the paved path, call it, make it alive, call it, and then we're done. This is a world of the future. We clearly don't have that world today.
Yep.
That's a world that I want to build. Just these little tools, functions that are just alive, sitting somewhere on some server. I mean, and it's open too. So if you found something that is even more performant, take a branch, add it, merge back to main, make it better. So we are all not just doing the same. It's great to have an LLM that gives you the piece of code or something, but it's still not good. It's still like one step removed from what I'm talking about. It shouldn't even be the code itself. The code should be available for you to see, but it should just give you a live function that you can call through an API that will work. And then maybe the thing that hosts it is open, some kind of Wikipedia version of something. But that's what I want to see. And then it's just pipes. You just build in programs. Basically, it's ETLs. You just connect this to this, to this, to this, to this. You hit run, and the whole thing should work.
Yeah. Amazing. And I spoke with
But that's the future state. And hopefully maybe in 4 years, we realize that.
Well, vision. I think a lot of people want this, right? And I did a live stream the other day with Simon Willison, who what an awesome dude. The fact that
prolific.
Yeah. And in fact, he's one of the things he's excited as you and I, you get on a call with him and he's like, it's absolutely, and of course his work in Python from all the frameworks side, from being a co-creator of Django to all the machine learning and GenAI stuff.
I just learned he co-created Django.
That's wild, isn't it?
It's prolific.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But he has a package called LLM. You can pip install LLM and use it in the terminal, and you can essentially use it to pipe all types of stuff from LLMs and vice versa. So my only point in raising this is that there are a lot of people thinking about this type of tooling already on the open side as well. So I think there is a bright future in this respect. It'll take us time though, right?
Yeah, it took us time, and then we still have to host it somewhere. The compute has to be open. That's the part. And then also, do we need a new conference? I don't know. Where do we go and sit together and have this conversation with like-minded people? ACM has all their different SIGs. Should there be something? Where do I find my tribe of all of us that want to create these things? And we're all building our own little this and that. Where do we hunker down and measure our progress? And over here in Berkeley, one of the best part about Berkeley is Shapenese, Alice Waters. And one of my colleagues did a research, open innovation ecosystem, where the whole thing was a California cuisine farm to table, was a whole revolution in America about food. And the reason why it succeeded is there was an open innovation ecosystem where everybody will come together and say, you will be the bread maker, you make the best breads, we will all support you, and we'll serve that bread at the restaurant. That became Acme Bakery. Somebody else is a cheesemonger. We will all support you. It became Cowgirl Creamery. Somebody else is the ice cream maker. Somebody else is the wine maker. So we are all just like different people own different parts of the thing, and it's all open.
Yeah.
But that if we all achieve the goal, then this is what we can create. I think we need something close to that for what we're talking about here.
I think so. And I do, as you know, I'm co-chairing the AI and machine learning and data science track at SciPy conference this year. I think that's a good place to start thinking about these things. I mean, it was set up for scientific Python and PyData, so it's very much been involved in these conversations. I don't know whether it's the right place to continue these conversations, because I think it needs to open up a lot. But these types of places around PyData, NumFocus, SciPy, I think are good places to at least start these conversations and gauge who's interested and in what.
Absolutely. We are very thankful that the deadline was extended to March the 4th or 5th.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're coming in under the deadline.
That's
we're putting together a proposal, and we'll be there. Hopefully,
fantastic.
We'll be accepted, and we'll be there in Tacoma.
Yep, great. And it's the first year it's in Tacoma. I love going to Austin for the Python community and that type of stuff, but mid-July in Austin, Texas. Come on, it's wild. And the thing that's wild as well isn't
it's very
only
uncomfortable, physically uncomfortable.
Yeah, and the joke is it isn't only like 110 degrees Fahrenheit outside on and off. They also pump the AC inside, so you need to like take a light coat around as well. So you get both. The trials and tribulations of having fun in the Python ecosystem. Of course, this is a wonderful example of an open source commons, and there are certain elements of a tragedy of the commons around it, but it's something which has created so much value, inestimable value in a lot of ways, I think. So I'm wondering, and this is speculative, of course, but it's a prediction question, and we're machine learners in our own ways, right? So speculatively, what could a future open source commons for generative AI look like to your mind?
Ooh, okay. Okay, I think we need to have something like Wikipedia. Amazing. Without the begging for money every month. In the future, we would have solved funding the commons. I gave a talk, Ethereum, I think there's a conference called Funding the Commons that I gave a talk in last year or 2 years ago. And one of the things I said we should actually do is, if you are building any kind of enterprise-based products, so commercially available product, most of the time you're building a product on top of open source, right? Whatever it is you're building has open source in it. If you can pull the libraries that you use, at least the first layer, not the sub-dependencies, the thing that you pip install, the thing that you import, that layer, if you can pull that and see who are the contributors, the contributor graph to that part, and just keep track of that, just keep track of it, at least know who these people are. Then when your product hits commercial success, maybe one of the things you might want to do is give like maybe perhaps 1% of your profits to those individuals, so that there's some kind of give back. And if we all did that, then we could kind of come up with some way of funding the commons that grows with our success. Now, and then on top of that, companies like mine and others who may run compute, who do things that are compute heavy, if you get to a point and you have your own compute systems, or you have your own data centers, could you perhaps also give 1% of your compute to open efforts, so that that 1% of your compute can then host these kinds of models that we're talking about?
Amazing. So I think this is wonderful for all the computational and code-based contributors. I suppose a provocation is, how do we think about compensating people who have put blood, sweat, and tears and years of human labor into training data that's sucked up into these giant machines?
That one is a lot harder to do. I don't know how we solve that one. Yeah. For code-based stuff, yes, we can. But for everything else on the internet that goes into these machines, it might be a lot harder. So for our friendly companies out there who index the internet, they know if you are a company that your business is search, you know when your crawler crawls this information, and you could unfold everything and know from which domain what came. And from that, we have domain registries that you can see who owned that domain and what it was registered.
Yep.
So we could, if we wanted to, maybe it's very expensive and tedious. I think we could go all the way back and find out who did what to whom when.
Absolutely.
That's the first pass. Now, when we gather all that information, what we do with it is something else entirely. But at least we should gather that information.
Very much so. And my intention isn't to be critical of Google currently. I am critical of Google. My intention now is not to be critical. It's to state, I think, a pretty significant negative externality of Web 2.0, of Google, of social media, in terms of, I mean, I think the most obvious example is what the web, search, and social media have done to mainstream journalism. Right? So the fact that things will show search results with respect to mainstream journalism, that type of stuff has, without, I think, Google doesn't pay for any of the search results it shows, right? And I'm not saying they necessarily should, but I think there are arguments that when they're providing such a service and they're leveraging, all these creative endeavors, a lot of modern tech companies, I suppose, have inserted themselves as, there's actually a wonderful book by Cory Doctorow about this called Chokepoint Capitalism. And I don't necessarily agree with the entire assessment, but essentially a lot of tech companies, there's an argument that they have inserted themselves between cultural producers and consumers and act as bridge trolls of some sort, right? And what that does to the cultural production section is it reduces the incentives and the ability, the economic ability to actually produce anything. And that's part of why we've seen mainstream journalism kind of falter so much. We end up with last bastions of mainstream journalism in a lot of ways being publications such as the New York Times, and we see what's happening there currently, right? With respect to all of their stuff being sucked up into large language models as well. So I think the point is that this isn't new with respect to LLMs. It's something which a lot of modern tech
it's just intensifying it.
Exactly.
I think it's intensifying it, and it's allowing people to actually see, like you said, the web, amazing URLs, URIs, but provenance wasn't built in.
Yep.
So these are just unintended consequences. And now we have to grapple with what does this actually mean for us?
Yep.
And how do we actually solve provenance? And can we solve provenance at scale? Like, is there such a fingerprint that can go all the way through from web scraping into a dying data set, into a training data set, into an LLM, into the output, to be able to know that this piece of data was actually in here? Might be such a complex problem that there may not be an answer to, because we've done so many transformations that we probably can unfurl it. So that means we need to come up with a different, maybe we're thinking about the problem too myopically, and we need to have more imagination of how do we actually solve this in a way where all parties win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can get into like local minima of pretty cynical ruts every now and then. I really appreciate your ability to step back, focus on the problem and say, these are approaches to find solutions. I actually find it really, really inspiring and grounding for me. I also love that you mentioned Wikipedia, because in stark contrast to what I've been saying around a lot of, tech and the internet, Wikipedia is it's maybe the paradigm of Web 2.0 working well, where we've seen walled gardens put up everywhere else. I do think in other ways, maybe Reddit has a lot of problems, don't get me wrong. Craigslist, of course, had a lot of problems. But I think these are all examples of, being incredibly open, and not necessarily falling into a pit of advertising-based business models. Of course, I'd prefer not Wikipedia to not ask me for money every so-and-so. But I do think it is an incredible space that, so for example, if Wikipedia, I wonder how they're thinking about LLMs currently with respect to their product.
Who knows?
But if ChatGPT was a Wikimedia Foundation product, I'd be far more happy with one company, having, I think, accountability and some sort of power over this type of thing.
Absolutely. And then for most of us in machine learning, everybody learned building their models training on Wikipedia. It was one of the data sets that, oh, this is all of Wikipedia, and you just download it and then you use it. Such a powerful paradigm. And Craigslist is a business that still makes money till today.
Yep.
And it hasn't been unseated because it just works.
Yep.
And because it works and it's not trying to do more than it's going to do, maybe one could look back and say they could make even more money, but it's been sustainable and it just stays steady doing what it's going to do.
And part of his point was like, my goal isn't to make the most money, right? Like, of course I want to live and do all these things, but, you know, and support myself, but I'm not solely optimizing for shareholder value maximization or whatever other a lot of companies are actually legally bound to do, in fact.
And then this is something that we all need to think about, especially all of us LLM, ML people. If you want to create a company, really think about it. What kind of company do you want to create? And do you want to be venture backed? Because if you're going to go the venture route, you're talking about you want to be a high growth business. So that's a very different lane from something that is going to need like patient capital.
Mm-hmm.
So you just also have to be somewhat business savvy to understand what kind of a product that is better suited for venture versus not.
Yeah, absolutely. To wrap up in a minute, I do want to bring this back to tooling and accessibility with respect to LLMs, because we've been talking about an open source commons and things such as Wikipedia and an open information commons. I am interested in kind of your speculations around what. So something I don't think that's talked about enough is that places like Wikipedia involve, there's a lot of provenance there as well, actually, but they involve conversations where, and a lot of interaction effects between different people. Stack Overflow, for all its challenges, and like, to be clear, Stack Overflow has a bunch of toxic elements as well with respect to accessibility for people asking questions in certain places, that type of stuff, of course. Wonderful space also. But I'm wondering, there's actually a big shift in that when we use ChatGPT, I'm no longer writing anything you will see unless I post it somewhere, right? I'm not putting something on a forum. I'm interacting with an LLM that is actually proprietary, and any information I give to it isn't returned to the commons, it's returned to OpenAI, right? So there is actually a significant shift in terms of what we're interacting with and what type of contributions we make, right? So my question is, are we going to lose potential? Do you think we might potentially lose, unless we're careful, these wonderful open information commons such as Stack Overflow and Wikipedia if we start solely or more and more interacting with closed models, or even open source models,
or even open models?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think the answer is yes.
Shit.
I would like to lie to you and come up with some Pollyanna. No. Yes. Yep. Because it is, in a weird way, somewhat dystopian. You are just talking to one thing and it's becoming a source of truth. Yeah.
Source of reality. And it's no longer we're losing shared reality, right?
There is no shared reality, which is for everybody. You may not like Elon Musk or anything. The last shared reality place is still Twitter.
Yep.
As toxic, as crazy as it can be, but it is one of the last few places where there feels to be like a market square environment, where certain times you're like, oh, World Cup is happening, we're all on here. This is happening, we're all on here. You need that back and forth negotiation. One of the best aspects of Wikipedia is you could challenge it and be like, actually, no, I am going to correct this post right now. And then you have to log in and all this conversation about negotiating what gets to go in, what doesn't get to go in. It's rich. It's an intellectually stimulating environment. All of those are going to collapse into a black hole.
I just had an idea that I wonder, I'm sure people are thinking about this, but what if we had LLMs that, like, you and I can chat with an LLM together? You can open your app and we can have a conversation that's then published to the open web or incorporated into it.
That would be a nice thing where, all right, these are the top queries of the week.
Yep.
And many of you have asked this same question over and over again. So we've put in here all the transcripts. You have to obviously say, yes, I want my stuff to be open. And we just push it out there, push it out there, push it out there, push it out there.
Yep.
And then you can validate that, indeed, I did ask this question. Indeed, this is where it led to. This is my train of thought. This is like, it'll be interesting to actually have a thing like that. And, you know, but we're also at the very beginning. Let's not assume that innovation is dead. Innovation is not dead. LLMs are very, very powerful.
Yeah.
We are living in Florence right now at the start of the Enlightenment.
Yep.
And somebody watching this live stream right now is having a great idea. We've seen these tools. We are asking questions. We're being very, very hard on them. We're challenging them. And as we do that, we make them better. We make them better. We make them better until we create the vision of the world that we actually all want. Yeah. It's not winner take all. I don't care if they raise $7 trillion. This is not just going to be a money solution. There's something about human beings, that human beings, their emotion is such a powerful thing that they don't thrive when certain things occur. So I'm not surprised about is it Sora? Like human beings, it's going to be very, very hard to watch a movie that was completely AI generated, because it's not just about the stories. We are humans and we're messy. We want to fall in love with an actor. We want to follow that actor. We want to know their backstory. We want to see them looking disheveled at Dunkin' Donuts. We want to see them fall in love. We want to see them have kids. You know, you have a relationship with a human. And part of that is what makes that human telling the story even much more important. So let's not forget the human aspects to these technologies. As amazing as they are still being processed by human beings, and human beings are emotionally temperamental beings. And if you do not do the right things to them, they won't flourish and they'll start to wilt.
Of course.
And then somebody else is going to see that and turn that into a business opportunity. And then the humans flourish and then they make money. And then everybody else is going to pile on top of that, and that'll become the fifth path.
Absolutely. And to your point, I mean, I love reading fiction. It's one of my favorite things to do. And one of the things I love about reading fiction is knowing and feeling that it was written by another human, and how much they put into it, and getting insight into the feelings, thoughts, sensations, perceptions of someone else, and something they've crafted through that. And in terms of connection and building, returning to shared reality, it's increasingly important, right?
So I feel very optimistic.
Yeah.
I feel absolutely optimistic, because what we need to do is imagine even better futures with these tools. And also, to everybody that writes sci-fi, stop writing dystopian futures. Techno-optimistic futures, because I think we're also trapped with the limited stories we have. It's always some dystopian thing. No, what about the techno-optimistic future that more, Star Trek, that kind of thing?
Absolutely. Star Trek's incredible. And I think to your point about messiness as well, I mean, I think one of the things I love about Star Trek, Star Wars on average is good versus evil, right? Whereas Star Trek is, okay, we're in a situation and everyone has all these weird incentives. How do we negotiate things to figure it out? And we were talking about wokeism and these types of things with respect to Google and that. But if you look at Star Trek, and even diversity in the original cast of Star Trek and what happened through the decades, they were on top of all these things, way ahead of their time, I think.
Yeah, and then I think, I went to Berkeley. I love Berkeley. One of the things I realized at Berkeley very quickly was this place is not as actually open-minded as I thought. I don't have any friends that is openly Republican. That is disturbing. Everybody around me is liberal. Yep. I'm a liberal, but I don't want to live in a world where everybody else is liberal. Something about that just feels suffocating. Like,
I don't want to live in a bubble.
Nobody else thinks differently from me. Nothing. And I shouldn't have to hate you because we have different ideas. You are not your ideas. It is an idea.
Yeah. I should learn to love you because you challenge me, right?
Exactly. And I want that. Like, knives sharpens knives. I want you to push my mind to the limit so that I can actually defend what I believe in. And if I can't defend what I believe in, maybe I actually don't believe in it. I'm just parroting what I've heard. And I also like to know if that's what I'm actually doing.
Yeah.
If this is actually not even a belief that I own, but something that I've been programmed to want to say because whatever external circumstances that I feel like I'm going to be validated by.
Yeah.
But we need to challenge each other. And I really think we are in an exciting time right now. And the reason why LLMs are so powerful is because they're so simple. you can just type or talk.
Yeah, talk to them.
Like, that's the last word I want to say. If you want to build open tools, the only way we're going to succeed is UX, UI, reduce the friction.
Design
you really,
thinking.
really have to put as much effort into the design as into the technical thing. The technical thing is not enough. It's the beginning, but it's not going to make you win. It's design.
Amazing. So I did want to wrap up by asking you, how do we create LLMs and generative AI tooling so everyone can use them to build production-ready apps? You've answered that.
It has to be very simple. It literally cannot be friction laden. It has to be so simple that 95% of the time it works. And then there might be those edge cases that you have to go deeper into. But the paved path should be the easiest path. And we should actually have a metric that every time we ship something, we have this almost like a scoreboard, time to delight, time to resolution, and actually measure this and only go for things that really create that time to delight. You shouldn't have to be an expert. You shouldn't have to be an infrastructure expert or DevOps expert to want to work with machine learning, because you're asking too much. You're asking too much. Machine learning itself is not trivial. Now you want me to go and do infrastructure and DevOps? This is literally too much. When somebody could just sit down and build better tooling and with better design and just be slightly more empathetic. Yeah, we're going to be empathetic and build better design, drop the barrier to entry, and then let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Beautiful. So one takeaway, I think that's really important for all the technical people listening and watching, is think about the time to delight and the time to value. I'm wondering if you have any other calls to action for all the data scientists and MLEs and new AI engineers who are listening.
My call to action is the next time you're sitting for your computer and you're using a tool, document all the moments of friction you encounter and start challenging that. Because you might be the one to actually design the better tool.
Yeah.
I have a tool that I'm designing that I think is going to help, but I don't believe I'm going to be the best person because I'm one person.
Yep.
And so let's continue having this open conversation. But I want people to start documenting all the moments of friction, so we actually know all the places we need to put more emphasis on. Because I think that's one of the biggest things. Where are the areas where are the real biggest pain points? And if we can really, really find all the biggest pain points, then we can evangelize those pain points and ask people to create startups to solve them. Like, that's the first things. Like, where are all the obstacles and boulders on this road to where we want to go? Document them all. And then those are all opportunities for companies to take them away.
Yeah. So let's draw the map together.
Yeah.
In order to clear it and build this wonderful future commons together.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. I'd just love to thank everyone for joining, but most importantly, I always appreciate your time and your expertise and your passion, Omoju. So thank you so much for joining me today for this conversation.
Thank you, Hugo. It's always fun. Let's not wait how many more years before we have another one?
I think we should do it later in the year or next year.
Exactly. It shouldn't be like 5 years.
Yeah.
Every
Actually,
5 or
I wonder
6 years.
maybe if we got together with Hamel and a few other people and did a panel and had like a more open conversation with a few other people around this, could be really fun.
It will be fun. It will be
I'll see if I can
because we're a tribe.
I was going to joke and say maybe I'll see if I can get Sam Altman to come and represent the other side of things. But actually, it would be interesting.
But he's not our enemy. He's our tribesman.
Well, exactly. But to your point of having a Republican at Berkeley, Sam Altman's clearly not a Republican at Berkeley, but he is someone who has come out and publicly said, I think there should be one model in future. You and I clearly disagree with that. So, of course, getting Sam would be tough, but getting someone who believes more in the closed aspect, having a genuine, good faith, open conversation, perhaps heated, perhaps not, would be fascinating, I think.
Oh, that would be awesome. And then highly respected. We respect each other. We actually follow the rules of debate, nothing personal, but really, really talk about the explanations to really support what you believe in.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And learn from each other.
Okay. Well, that's the call to action for me, to find this and we can figure it out. All right, Omoju, thank you once again.
All right. Talk to you later, Hugo. Bye.